Vorum cora fidelium, et tui moris in iis in accende emite spiritum tuum equea buntur,
et renovabis facium terrae.
Oremus Deus cora fidelium, Sancti Spiritus et ratione docuisti, da nobis in iodem spiritu recta sapere et eius amber consolatione godere, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Sede sapientiae.
Ora pro nobis.
Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. All right, so we're on page 375. Finally, as regards society as a whole, socialism is substituted for the reign of God in society and for Christian justice. So socialism is a purely humanistic form of government, as though society itself, not God, had established the particular rights and duties regarding familial and social life, and as though man's end were not heavenly beatitude, but rather a future earthly city. So, look at the footnotes, they're very interesting. On socialism, si quanta cura, where the error of socialism is explained in this way: domestic society, or the family, derives the whole principle of its existence from the civil law alone, and consequently that on civil law alone depend all rights of parents over their children, and especially that of providing for education. See, so that they go after the kids. That's why the schools are very important. Likewise, in his encyclical Code Apostolici Muneris, Leo XIII states regarding socialism: the Church, with much greater wisdom and good sense, recognizes the inequality among men who are born with different powers of body and mind, as well as inequality in actual possession of goods. So he upholds the strata of society, that there's some people more gifted than others in various ways, and and also some people, through their own efforts and work, etc., make more money than others and have more goods than others, and that's normal. See, and not that the state decides how you're going to live and what you're going to do. That's socialism. It has various degrees. Socialism has various degrees, but that's the general idea, that the state will decide where you will live. For example, the Russian seminarian told me, this was back in 2008, I think, he told me that in Russia, even to that day, I mean, even under Putin, that if you wanted to move, say, from Moscow to St. Petersburg, you had to get permission from the government. See, because you might be needed in a factory here or there. See, you couldn't just move around as you would. See, that's socialism, and that's those. And I'm sure it's probably the same in China. There's various levels and intensities of socialism, but that's the general principle: it's that the state really runs your life in all ways. And it's funny. Leo XIII, he's the inspiration for Leo XIV. The only thing that Leo XIII did that inspired Leo XIV was Rerum Novarum, in which he exhorted employers to pay their workers a living wage. You see, he had a certain sense of the problems of modern age, because the opposite of socialism is liberal economy. In other words, where the government says absolutely nothing about what you will do. So, there's no government of the economy, or of, no protections, yes, it might say, for workers or things like that. That is the other extreme of socialism. And really, the extreme of the liberal capitalism is what brought on socialism. See, the labor unions were reacting. I mean, and it's true that the 19th century and early 20th century employers treated their workers like dirt. That's true. And so he was warning against that. His famous motto from that encyclical was, an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. In other words, there should be an equality there. And But obviously he's not favoring anything in the way of socialism. As a matter of fact, he condemned it, Leo the 13th. So, cat exists. His purpose of existence is to be petted. My purpose of existence is to pet him. See, that's you have that understanding. Anyway, and Ferdinand Buisson, he was a socialist. Lafayette Laïque, to shackle reason and to constrict the intellect represents the commission of a sacrilege. The only religion capable of regenerating humanity, held for too long in slavery by dogmatic religions, is freedom of conscience served by intelligence. See that freedom of conscience? It is the cult of human reason. Now, it is possible, Buisson adds, to be a free thinker without being a Republican, and to be a Republican without being a socialist. As is shown in the Dictionnaire APOLOGETICS, laicism holds, that means complete secularization of society. The laicist spirit equals absolute autonomy of the individual. Autonomy of the individual equals popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty equals a democratic republic, universal suffrage, perfect equality of all goods, and socialism. That's what we have. We don't have it so much in this country, but France, forget it. England. Just so you know. Then Jean Jaurès, that's how you pronounce that. He has the accent in the wrong place, but that's the other way. He stated he was a socialist just before the World War I, and he was up on a soapbox all over France about socialism. He got shot. He was assassinated. What we must safeguard above all else, what is the inestimable good conquered by man through all of the prejudices, sufferings, and battles that he has undergone, is the idea that there is no truth that is sacred, that is one that man is forbidden to fully investigate. The greatest thing in the world is a sovereign freedom of the mind, is that every truth that does not come from us is a lie. It is that if the very ideal of God were made visible, if God himself stood before the masses in tangible form, man's first duty would be to refuse him obedience and to consider him as an equal in discourse, not as a master to whom one would be subject. It's pretty bad. So he got shot. I don't think he had the same sympathy well, I don't know. All over France you see Rue Jean Jaurès. Yeah, the street's named for him. All over France. Socialist. Anyway. Finally, as regards society, hence certain socialists speak of society with a mystical lilt to their voice, as though they were speaking of God. For in their eyes, society is indeed God in the very process of its own self-becoming. That's why when you hear this Prevost, he's always talking about something secular. In other words, that the purpose of the church is to enhance human life. He's definitely in this. All it is a sort of a Catholic or Christian chocolate sauce on it. That's all. You know, that you engage Christianity to provide a better place for people to wish to live. He said the other day, if Elon Musk he's worth $3 trillion now, I think, that we're in trouble because of that. One person has $3 trillion. Why are we in trouble? See, but you can't have that. Maybe he worked for it. Hey, he's bright. He's I'm no Elon Musk fan or anything, but it's just if somebody worked for it and they have it legitimately, why can't they have it? We're in trouble. Imagine having that much money. Gosh, the church you could build with that. So, semi-rationalism must be noted among the consequences of rationalism. Now, remember, that is to say, yes, there are supernatural mysteries, but they are able to be reasoned to. In other words, once we know them, we can figure them out by reason. That's semi-rationalism. It's not very common today. Is an attempt at reconciling rationalism with the Catholic faith. All right. It differs from absolute rationalism inasmuch as it admits the fact of divine revelation, properly so called. However, it does agree with it inasmuch as it holds that all revealed mysteries. That's not really correct translation. It does not agree with it inasmuch as it holds that all revealed mysteries can be demonstrated by means of principles of natural reason, and hence holds that there is no necessity that we believe on account of the authority of God who reveals. You see, the church would say if it's a supernatural mystery, you believe on the authority of God revealing, and you even believe those things which can be proved by reason, such as the existence of God, credo in unum deum, that there is one God you could prove. You see, but that's an object of faith, so you believe it, not only accept it. You see. In this way, semi-rationalism preserves the autonomy of reason. Likewise, the semi-rationalists say, as there is a distinction between the philosopher and his philosophy, he has the right and duty to submit himself to the authority he acknowledges as legitimate, but philosophy can neither can nor must submit to any authority. So it places reason at the top of everything. So that's those are your three semi-rationalists: Günther, Hermes, and Froschammer. But again, it's sort of a dead letter today. It was more common when this book was written. So you can read that. Liberalism, which we can find expressed in the thought of Félicité de Lamennais. Does anyone know who he is? Everybody knows Félicité de Lamennais. Yes?
I've heard the name.
Okay. He was a priest. I think he was from Brittany, if I'm not mistaken, but he was a French priest. And he lived 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, that area. And he was a liberal, and he was sort of the founder of liberal Catholicism. Liberal Catholicism said that we can live with an atheistic state, or a non-confessional state, and we shouldn't insist that the state embrace the Catholic faith, etc., etc. And free church in a free state. That was that the state has no obligation to profess the Catholic faith. Well, his ideas were condemned by Merari Vos Gregory XVI. And he and O'Connell and Montalembert, if I'm not mistaken. Montalembert was an associate in the same ideas. So was O'Connell. You know who O'Connell was? He was the Irishman who fought for the emancipation of Catholics in Ireland. That was 1829. The King, George IV, who was in every way dissolute, fat and dissolute. Everybody hated him, including the British. Was furiously against it. But the person that got it through was none other than Wellington, the famous general against Napoleon, who was at the time the prime minister. And he had the power. The king, all he does is, exist. And so he had the power. He got it through. So then O'Connell, at that time, O'Connell was representing Ireland in Parliament. So the British were getting soft, you might say, in a certain good sense. However, you see, Catholicism was emancipated not on the principle of its truth, but on the principle of liberalism. See, that it doesn't matter what religion you belong to. And the state doesn't have to be associated with the Church of England. See, as bad as that is, at least they had a sense of a confessional state. Even if it's the wrong confession, at least there was that sense that the state had to be connected to a religion. As a matter of fact, in England, before like the 18th century, you would be arrested if you didn't go to church on Sunday. The Anglicans, the police would come to your door. See, that was the idea, is that England is Church of England, and you go to Church of England, and otherwise you practice your religion, you see. That was the sense. I mean, up to the 19th century, that was the sense everywhere. I mean, in Europe, in the continent, Germany was divided up into the various confessions, the Catholic areas and the Protestant areas. France, of course, before the Revolution was that way. Spain. It's just the idea of a non-confessional state was invented in 1789 with the Constitution of the United States of America, and it's the first time in history that there was a non-confessional state. And what is even worse in the case of the U.S. is that the states followed suit. You see, the Constitution was meant to be a federal thing, and all it was saying is that we're not going to establish a national religion, or we're not going to get involved in the state confessions. In other words, that the Puritans in Massachusetts and then the Anglicans down in the South. We're not going to do that, because the South was very concerned about that. That the Puritans in the North, they had no use for that, and they were all Episcopalians, which meant Anglicans in the South. So the South was reticent about the Constitution. So that was part of the Bill of Rights, is that the federal government will not make any law. You see. But then the states followed that, which is because it really was by state at the time. The states were considered much more sovereign than they are now. It was by state. And then the states all said the same thing, the freedom of religion. So that really was the beginning of the problem. But it was the 18th century thinking of Voltaire and all of those people that brought on the non-confessional state. And we are suffering from that right now. I mean, for example, how do you do a law if there's no morality? And how do you do morality if there's no religion? See, so law depends on morality. So you have more than 60 million babies that have been killed because of abortion, because who's to say what? Some people on the Supreme Court, what do they know about morality? What is their reference point? So that's what we're living through now. You can't do law without morality, and you can't do morality without religion. So that's Félicité de Lamennais. He was condemned. He eventually apostatized and gave up the priesthood, and died that way. Another associate, another person who was promoting that was Lacordaire. He was a Dominican priest. He said, "I live as a liberal and I will die as a liberal." That's a quote from Lacordaire. He was very famous for his speeches in Notre Dame de Paris. He was a great preacher. And I don't think he said anything there that was particularly bad. I think it was all on dogma, etc. But he was a liberal Catholic. Then another one was Montalembert. And Montalembert was the one that produced the Quanta Cura, because he gave a speech in Belgium about all of these liberal ideas and all, and Pius IX responded by Quanta Cura. It's a little history for you. So Lamennais confused supernatural faith, which is necessary for salvation, with the common faith of the whole of humanity, which is preserved through tradition in all religions, a faith with that he called common sense or general reason. See, so you see ecumenism there. You see there's no dogmatic lines. You see, it's all one big faith. See, it's like a natural faith. Liberalism and indifferentism followed from this confusion, holding that any kind of profession of faith suffices for salvation. All religions are paths to God, Bergoglio. So it goes back to it. Speaking against the liberalism of Lamennais, Pope Gregory XVI wrote, "From an extended and unrestrained desire for novelty, truth is not looked for where it truly is found, and holding the holy and apostolic traditions in lower esteem, but instead is looked for in another vain, futile, and uncertain teachings which are not taught as being approved by the Church. All the while such men in their great vanity wrongly believe that the truth is supported upon teachings." Lamennais confused the glory of God and the salvation of souls with the passing breezes, the aura, of popular favor, and thus arrived at a false notion of charity. See, charity as a purely naturalistic and secularistic thing, which is very much Leo XIV. So more recently, the modernists had nearly the same bent of thought, intending, like the semi-rationalists and liberals, to discover a middle point of reconciliation between naturalism and the Catholic faith. That's Novus Ordo. Now, a virtuous mean does not indeed exist between two vices that are opposed by way of excess and defect. However, between truth and falsity, as well as between good and evil, the only mean that exists is mediocrity. So virtue, yes, but I said that wrong. Virtue does consist as a mean between a defect and an excess. So between gluttony and starving yourself to death, there is a virtue of taking care of your health. But truth does not have that. In other words, truth is not found as, well, there's the extreme liberals and there's extreme conservatives, so the truth must be found in the middle. Sometimes it is found in the middle, but that's only per accidens, whereas in virtues it's per se. But per accidens, yes, you might have two. You saw that in some heresies, but it has nothing to do with its opposites. Okay? That's the point there. So mediocrity, that is the confusion of good and evil, as well as the perversion of the true norm of judgment and of the will. See, so that's very important to understand. A lot of people think that, well, it must be somewhere in the middle. It has nothing to do with the middle or the left or the right. It has to do with reality. That's how you discover truth. Therefore, the Church condemned these attempts to reconcile rationalism with the Catholic faith, for there can be no reconciliation between contradictories, in this case the affirmation and denial of a supernatural order and of an essentially supernatural religion. Those two things can never go together. You can't affirm it and deny it at the same time. It's like saying it's cow and non-cow at the same time, and that's crazy and absurd. This contradiction does not exist in relation to the letter of the teaching of faith, but also as regards its spirit. So on the spirit of rationalism, according to the Church, this is all very important to understand the present problem. This must briefly be discussed for two reasons. So that we may see with greater clarity that it is completely impossible for us to reconcile rationalism with the Catholic faith, contrary to what may be claimed by semi-rationalism and modernism. 2, so that the usefulness and necessity of moral arguments in apologetics may be manifested with greater clarity. Talks about Blondel there. So we won't read that now. But it's good to read these footnotes. There's a lot of good stuff in them. We don't have time to get through the whole thing, but you learn more and more about what's going on today. This is all related to the present problem. So going to page 379, it is not a question of the spirit of this or that rationalist who can be oblivious to the gravity of their error. It should be his error. Rather, we are concerned here with the spirit of rationalism itself. Frequently, in its religious philosophy, rationalism commends with great emphasis not only sincerity in the search for truth, but also our natural religious sentiment. Nay, it admits the mysteries of Christianity understood in accord with a natural interpretation. Thus, for example, consider the work of Kant and Hegel regarding these matters. See, Kant believed in God because he felt it, you see, and believed in morality because of what he called the categorical imperative. In other words, there's something in your head that moves you to live well, to do what's right. Test spirits to see whether they are from God. Take care that nobody deceive you through philosophy. Indeed, the wisdom of this world is foolishness before God, etc., various others. Indeed, the spirit of rationalism is manifestly clear when it proclaims the principle of the absolute autonomy of reason, namely, human reason is so independent that faith cannot be commanded of it by God. According to the Church, this is the very spirit of infidelity, disobedience, rebellion, and the pride of life spoken by 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. In other words, it is the love of one's own excellence without subjection to God. So it's a form of naturalism that we oppose ourselves to God. Thus, the spirit of rationalism is so radically opposed to the spirit of God that the principle of the absolute autonomy of reason is not only wicked and perverse, but, as is stated in various encyclicals, the expression of the most foolish kind of arrogance, nonsense that leads to the freedom of destruction, which by the deceit of the wicked spreads forth everywhere. So you see some footnotes there. Likewise, in the opening constitution of Dei Filius, which is the First Vatican Council, thereupon there came into being and spread far and wide throughout the world that doctrine of rationalism or naturalism, utterly opposed to the Christian religion, since this is of supernatural origin, which spares no effort to bring it about that Christ, who alone is our Lord and Savior, is shut out from the minds of people and the moral life of nations. Thus, they would establish what they call the rule of simple reason or nature. So it's exactly what we have today. The abandonment and rejection of the Christian religion and the denial of God and his Christ has plunged the minds of many into the abyss of pantheism, materialism, and atheism, and the consequence is that they strive to destroy rational nature itself, to deny any criterion of what is right and just, and to overthrow the very foundations of human society. You see why they had to have a Vatican II. I mean, with this Vatican I, they were crushed. So those very modernists that were crushed under all of this had to have their council that revived all of this. So you see these preconciliar schemas, which have a certain authority, actually. What is suggested to the council to pass. And then the council sometimes, almost always, will adjust them. But the preconciliar schemas, it shows what this is probably written by Cardinal Francois. Super good. Therefore, detesting the portents, the early signs of these sorts of errors because of the duties falling to our supreme pastoral office, as well as from the sentiments of our own soul, to the greatest degree possible for us, and solicitous for the eternal salvation of souls, we simultaneously most strongly admonish and implore those who hold positions of authority and who privately or publicly hold an office in schools for the education and instruction of youth, that they ward off from the souls of those who are placed in their care this pestilential march of unbelief, and fortify them against the dangers of falling under its sway. It's 1870, so the context is Franco-Prussian War. France has been relatively favorable to the Catholic faith because of the Empress Eugenie, who was a very pious Spanish woman, married to the Emperor Napoleon III, who was not. He was a Freemason and a carbonarist and a womanizer, liberal revolutionist. All right, not a very nice person. But she was very good. And so the Catholic faith flourished a great deal under his rule, which was from about 1840 to 1870, more or less. But then he fell. So this is the context. And don't forget, it was because the French pulled out of the Rome in 1870 to fight their battles with Germany, which they lost terribly. The Garibaldi animals came in. He was a Freemason too, and took over Rome, and the Pope had to leave, and they had to suspend the council. The council was never officially closed, so that means Vatican II is really an extension of Vatican I, because the council was never closed, not formally closed. So even then, it sort of has a, let's say, a lack of any kind of authenticity, because they should have closed the first council and then, got the second one going. But anyway, it's not terribly important. But so this is the context. Now, the Third Republic is coming in France, and they're going to do all of these things. They're going to close all the Catholic schools and get rid of the nuns and the brothers and all of that, and secularize the schools in the years that follow, 1880s, 1890s, etc. So, the majority of recent pantheists typically say that what is taught in pantheistic philosophy is likewise in reality contained in the Christian faith, saying, however, that there is a great distinction in the form of conceiving and understanding the same thing. They say that faith is the lowest form of conceiving the truth, whereas pantheistic speculation is the supreme and most perfect form of wisdom. Indeed, they say that the truth is not understood per se by the Christian faith, but instead is accepted under concepts of particular sensible things and veiled in symbols, whereas it falls to philosophical speculations to understand the pure truth per se. Hence, they boast that they in no way deny the dogmas of the Christian creed concerning God, the Trinity, the Incarnation, the redemption, the resurrection, but quite to the contrary, speculatively understand them. By this trickery, while they peddle these fictions concerning the evolution of pure being in the world and humanity as though there were speculative declarations of Christian dogmas, they eagerly strive to hold these two positions, so that they may once protect themselves from the infamy of atheism and impiety, and yet assault the Christian religion by deforming its dogmas and abusing its terms with great efficacy. See, so, oh no, we're not atheists, we're not impious, but they want to deform its dogmas. That's precisely the Novus transformation of Catholicism. Hence, in the exposition of pantheistic impiety, we have deemed it opportune to mention also this deceit and abuse of Christian terms. All right. So, in a word, the spirit of rationalism is, as the First Vatican Council says, to perversely substitute the kingdom of nature and reason for the kingdom of God. And that is the Noah's Ark. All right. If you look on the top of page 382, St. Thomas talks about naturalism back in the 13th century. In this, the angel had an undue desire to be like unto God. He's talking about Lucifer. For he desired as the ultimate end of beatitude that which he was able to attain by the powers of his own nature, turning his desire away from supernatural beatitude, which comes from the grace of God. Or if he desired as his last end that likeness to God which is given by grace, he willed to have it through the power of his own nature, and not as something received from the divine aid, according to God's own ordering of things. In this he perversely willed to be like unto God. What did Paul VI say in the closing? Something to the effect, the religion that deifies God, deifies man, has come together with the religion of God, or something like that. I wish I had the quote. And he said, was there a clash, because of these, the deification of man and deification of God? Is there a clash? No, there's dialogue and all this. I'll get the quote for you. It's at the closing speech of the council. Look at number 3 there. We must also note that the perversity of the spirit of rationalism is not always immediately apparent, for it is not as much found in the object to which it tends as in its mode of tending toward its object. Very important. It proposes to itself a good object, namely social and intellectual progress, though without God's aid and without obedience to God. And St. Thomas notes this too. Sin can take place freely by freely choosing something that is good in itself, though not according to a due measure or rule. In this way, the defect leading one to sin exists only on the side of the person's choice, which does not have a due order, and not on the side of the thing that is chosen. In other words, you could will something good for a perverse reason. For example, someone may choose to pray without heeding the order established by the church. And a sin of this kind does not presuppose ignorance, but instead only presupposes an absence of consideration concerning those things which should be considered. And in this way, the angel sinned by turning himself toward his own good through free choice without ordering this to the rule of the divine will. So he wanted something that was in itself good, that is, the elevation that comes from grace, etc., but he wanted it through his own powers. All right. So look at number 4. Nay, rationalism establishes gatherings of religion so that all of them may be reconciled. I think I've heard that somewhere. And in these gatherings, all religions are represented except for Catholicism. Well, that has changed. This is Assisi. An apparent good is all the more dangerous to the degree that it resembles the true good. Very important principle. According to the words of St. Paul and St. John, the Antichrist will not appear suddenly as a manifest and violent enemy of the church, but will lead people astray through deceitful marvels, as a false Christ. Then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, do not believe him, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets. and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And similarly, St. John said, Dearly beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, if they be of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. By this is the Spirit of God known. Every spirit which confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh of God, and every spirit that dissolveth Jesus is not of God. This is Antichrist, of whom you have heard that he cometh. So, thus we have a verification of the expression, the corruption of the best is the worst, corruptio optimi pessima, namely the corruption of charity and religious faith under the appearance of tolerance and reconciliation of all churches and religions. There it is. It's all from that evil source of rationalism and naturalism. All right, division. Pavlovsky.
Sorry about that, Your Excellency.
If you're doing that in public, it tells me that you're doing it in private. You have to suppress the habit, even in your room. All right, because it's very bad manners, and priests should never be doing that. Okay. Division of systems of rationalism and naturalism. If you look at the schema there, the rationalism denies the possibility of supernatural revelation, either from the perspective of the object, and that's pantheistic evolutionism. And that can be either idealistic, Hegel, where everything is there's a world spirit that is constantly moving, something like constantly spiraling up and changing. So that's an idealistic type. And then the other is empiricist. That's Haeckel. Darwin is always credited with evolutionism, but it started with Haeckel. Haeckel was far more evolutionistic even than Darwin, and that is, that everything's changing substantially without a due cause. That's empiricist or materialistic evolutionism, that a frog can turn into, or a fish can turn into a frog because the fish sees the frog or sees a mammal or something on the shore, and then it wants to be higher than it is, so then it crawls out of the water and then it becomes a frog. I mean, it doesn't happen exactly like that, but that's the idea, is that without a sufficient cause, you can go from a lower being to a higher being. That's evolutionism, materialistic evolutionism, and it's totally absurd because it denies the principle of causality. Something has to have a sufficient cause. Everything has to have a sufficient cause. You can't just, you can't become an angel because you want to, or you envy an angel or something like that. You would have to be actually essentially changed. Because a frog is not a fish. They are essentially different. To undergo an essential change requires the creator. You can't wish it on yourself. You can't in any way do anything for yourself. As our Lord said, you can't even increase your height by 1 cubit or one, very small amount on your own. You see, everything must have a cause. That's part of the first principles of reason. Any event must have a cause. The only thing that doesn't have a cause is God. He's the uncaused cause. Everything else in the universe has to have a cause. Any event, any being, any essence, etc., has to have a cause. See, so evolutionism, materialistic evolutionism, denies that. Fundamentally, it may not say that, but it fundamentally denies it. See, so it's, as I say, it's the mythology of the 19th and 20th centuries, but it serves everyone very well, especially for evolution of thought, and evolution of ideas, and I don't think they care about the animals so much as the idea that we are always improving. So, or from the perspective of the knowing subject, agnosticism. So idealistic agnosticism is what I described with Kant, that you can't know the essences of anything. All you know are appearances, and your mind organizes the appearances so that the source of truth is not the object, but what's in your mind. And your categories may be different from mine. So it's all very, you can't know anything for sure. So, and then empiricist, that's the positivist. That means you can only know scientifically proved facts. That's all. So anything that is immaterial or anything like that, that's outside of human knowledge. So. Or from the perspective of God as the agent, Cherbury, Voltaire, Cousin, Simon, it's deism. Deism is God exists, but he has no care of the world. We don't owe him anything. Maybe occasional praise or comment or a day of thinking about the grand architect of the universe. That's the Masonic name for God. But he you're on your own. That's deism. It's virtual atheism. It's just that atheism had a bad name when the deists were cooking up their ideas in the 18th century. Atheism. Deism, we believe in God, yeah. Right. So atheism became much more acceptable later on. So where are we? So now systems belonging to the first division can be reduced to pantheism or pantheistic evolutionism, which was condemned in the first proposition of Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors and in Canon 3.2 of the Constitution Dei Filius. Okay, so the latter text states, if anyone says that man cannot be called by God to a knowledge and perfection that surpasses the natural, but that he can and must by himself, through constant progress, finally arrive at the possession of all that is true and good, let him be anathema. So that's against naturalism. This doctrine presupposes what is said in the first proposition of the Syllabus of Errors, namely, God actually becomes himself in man and in the world. All things are God and have the very substance of God. That's in the Novus Ordo implicitly, that, as I said, it drags God down to the natural order. God becomes man. In the other way, in the Hegelian, man becomes God. That's the ascending pantheism. But the descending pantheism is actually more subtle and therefore more dangerous. And that is that God, the supernatural, is drawn down to the natural order. Father Bob. That's perfect. He's one of the guys. There's nothing supernatural about the liturgy, about the priests themselves. I mean, that's, I think, why there's so much misbehavior among those priests. There's nothing supernatural about them. There's, the idea of the sacredness of the priesthood, etc., and it's all gone. I have known some of them over the years. They have no sense of it. They're just functionaries, at the table. And I'm not saying that about all of them, but I'm saying that about many of them, and probably most of them. The Novus Ordo priest that I had dinner with last week, before he said, maybe I told you this, he tries to make the new mass as Catholic as can be. That's what he said. But he says, the traditional mass, it's Catholic by itself. That's what he said to me. But he says the new mass. But that's the idea, is that you're saying something that is, and he knows it. He says, how could you make it as Catholic as can be if it has? That it is not communicating something that is supernatural. It's communicating something natural. So that's the as the pantheists say, especially Spinoza, Schelling, Fichte, Hegel, and Haeckel, as well as other modern thinkers. These systems deny the existence of supernatural being and truth, as well as the possibility of miracles, because they reject the existence of God, the free creator, who is really and essentially distinct from the world. Now you see that Leo got rid of 2 miracles in sacred scripture. They say that the first cause is immanent within the world. See that the world just poofed into existence. Or that the world is eternal, like as God is eternal. Big Bang. That's all nonsense. Who provided the fuel for the Big Bang, number one, and who lit the match for the Big Bang, number two? How do you have a huge explosion without material that can explode? It's full of potential energy. Where do you get that from? Has anyone ever explained that? How do you run your car if there's no gasoline in it? So, all right, I'll quit that. But, so this is important for all the understanding of the present problem. Today's 9/18. Today is the feast of Saint Joseph Cupertino, who is the patron of struggling students. He didn't do well in school, let's put it that way, but he was ordained a priest. There's that famous movie, I don't know if it's accurate, where he got the precise question that he knew. So funny too. In that movie, it's the cardinal says, "I know this one," because he had that talk with him. He's okay, but I'm not sure about the others. He goes, and they're all kneeling there. The way he says it is funny, So it's probably not accurate, but I read The Life of Saint Joseph Cupertino years ago, but I forget what everyone said. So, but anyway, if you're struggling, you can pray to Saint Joseph Cupertino. All right. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, amen. Subtuum praesidium confugimus sancta Dei genitrix nostris deprecationis et auspicias et necessitatibus, sed a periculis cunctis libera nos semper, virgo gloriosa benedicta. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. And there's that scene where the mother is talking to the superior, and she's in the church, and the superior says, "Oh, yeah, shouldn't be talking in front of the Blessed Sacrament." And she says, "What better place could you talk with God here? What better place could I say these things?" And so it's very funny. She did a good job at that. Are you brutally memorizing?
Yes, I'm trying to.
The